Welcome back to GMT with me, David Eades. Now, just a moment or two ago, we heard Aaron talking about that deal made by the US and the EU to head off a transatlantic trade war. Trade, just one method that governments can use to exert political pressure. Well, a new report out of the US says that China is using its citizens' holiday habits as a tool to punish or reward other countries. Let's have a look at this. Over the past 2 decades, Chinese tourism has certainly exploded. That's the 1997 figure. 5.3 million Chinese tourists went abroad on their holidays then. China's growing middle class, though, means more people are getting out and about. Last year, outbound tourism numbers reached 130 million, and it's predicted that by 2025, more than 220 million tourists will leave China in search of adventure every year. And they tend to splash the cash when they get there. Chinese tourists outspend every other country. That includes the United States. So they're worth having, aren't they? How China is using this massive growth in tourism to exert influence on other governments, though, well, that's quite a question. Rees led the research and is an Asia-Pacific analyst at Stratfor. He joins me from Austin, Texas. And joining us from Hamburg is Wolfgang Georg Arlt, who's the founder and director of the China Outbound Tourism Research Institute. Gents, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Evan, it's your work. Let's start with you. I mean, just the figures tell a story of their own, don't they?
Yes, it's a massive outflow of tourists coming out of China right now. It's a very important market, especially for a lot of smaller tourist markets around the world.
Right, and the forecast that we were showing there is a sort of inexorable rise in numbers. But I suppose the point you're making is that it's where they actually head off to that might be determined by the Chinese government?
Yes, the Chinese government has a unique role in the economy. It has the ability to play gatekeeper to a certain extent to a certain flow of tourists going overseas. We saw this play out last year with South Korea. There was an informal ban that hit Chinese tourist numbers to South Korea. And we're seeing it play out right now with Palau and potentially Taiwan. Does
that go as far, I'll come to Wolfgang in a moment, does that go as far as withdrawing, when you mentioned South Korea, for example, withdrawing what they call their approved destination status, which of course is something I guess every country would like to have?
So I've never seen threats of that. I don't think that's a potential. But what does happen is the Chinese government will reportedly give instructions to Chinese tour agencies to stop booking package tours to certain destinations. And that can have a devastating effect on Chinese tourism flows that tourism sectors have come to rely on. And that flows to different parts of the economy.
Right. I asked that question, Wolfgang, because, I mean, you know all about the tour operation, the way it works, the way the government is or isn't involved. How directly does the government play a role in where all these tourists might go?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the program. So I certainly agree that the Chinese government is using the tourist as a soft power tool. And actually, they're not even making this a secret. So in March, when the China National Tourism Administration was made into a ministry, the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, the National People's Congress, it was said this is done to increase the soft power and the cultural influence of China. So this is the official policy statement. So this is certainly true. On the other hand, of course, we have to realize, even so maybe Xi Jinping is now the most powerful person in the world, he doesn't have a joystick to run the Chinese economy or the Chinese tourism outflow. So he can influence in a big way where the package tourists are going, people traveling with a travel agency. But in many countries, half or even more than half of the visitors from China are what is called FIT, individual travelers. And we have seen that the individual travelers, especially the younger people, don't care that much anymore what the government is telling them where they should travel to or where they should not travel to. They rather much more care what some celebrities, some key opinion leaders, some film stars, TV stars, what they're recommending.
Right, so it's a relatively light hand on the tiller then, is that what you're saying? Because there's a certain element of this report, and I hope, Evan, you'd agree with me, China's unlikely weapon tourists, it's called. It's got a slightly sinister element to it.
Well, I think that the Chinese version will be turning this into something positive, that they are encouraging Chinese tourists to go, for instance, to developing countries to spend their money there. But certainly, for instance, now when Panama switched from being connected to Taiwan to being connected to the People's Republic of China, certainly now China is promoting Chinese tourism to Panama, or they did the same with the Philippines before. When Mr. Duarte became a friend of China, they were encouraging Chinese tourists to go to the Philippines.
It's fascinating stuff. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, due to time. But Evan, Wolfgang, thank you both very much indeed for enlightening us.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us here on GMT. We've obviously got more for you on Friday, so stay with us for that and stay with us with BBC World News throughout the day. Bye for now.